I'm a first-generation farmer, but I'm not new to farming. In fact, I come from a family of agricultural chemical applicators. I was meant to be the third generation of those. As a child, my days would often start waking up in the back of an old sheep dipping truck in a paddock with a few thousand sheep and a handful of sheepdogs, all covered in chemical. Or in my dad's spray truck, spraying pesticides all over the paddocks up and down the Waitaki Valley. I would often, aside from the gorgeous views of that world, notice the profound and unique smells of the different chemicals that my dad would apply. Chemicals like MCPA, 2,4-D, paraquat, lawsban were some of the standout smells. I got really good at identifying which chemicals my dad were using by their smells, and I also figured that he must have been pretty proud of me being able to do that. My house always had a really strong chemical smell to it. I would notice it walking home from school, about halfway down the road, depending on the wind, but I thought nothing of it. It was, to me, the smell of home. At age 11, I got the opportunity to work on a local dairy farm for a wonderful family. It became like my second home. Come 15, after a reasonably unsuccessful time at high school, I had the opportunity to leave legally and start full-time on the farm. I jumped on that opportunity. I enrolled in an Ag ITO training course, and that started my farming career. By the age of 20, I was managing high-production farms. I got really good at getting milk out of cows and managing ryegrass and clover pastures. I'd reached the top of my farming career by getting into the top 5% production for milk solid production per cow. And I thought to myself, the obvious next step for me would be contract milking. At around that time, we welcomed our daughter, Harper Olive Frew, to the world. This was in 2012. This, for me, at this time of my life, really enforced for me that what I was doing was the right thing, working tirelessly to provide the lifestyle that I had always dreamed of. To take this next step into contract milking, me understanding the financials behind my high production models that I prided myself on, turns out there was a larger cost to that than I had originally thought. And to add to that challenge, when I was 18 years old, I was involved in a 100-kilometre-an-hour head-on car crash with a Ravensdown fert salesman. This left me bankrupt. It cost me $96,000. Therefore, it was going to be a real challenge getting into self-employment. I was left resigned. At around that same time, I was phoned up by a company that I used to work for briefly in the past, a chemical application company. They asked if I'd like a job managing the place. I thought to myself, well, I'd reached the top of my farming career. Why not go and follow the family footsteps and make my family proud? So I packed the family up, and off to Leaston we moved, where I became the chemical expert. I remember at the time, my grandfather was in hospital. He was dying of bowel cancer and things weren't good. I went to visit him on his last few months and told him what I'd done and where I was going. And although he was really weak at the time, I could tell he was really proud of me, and that felt really good. About a season into working up in Leaston, Grandad died. And this hit the family hard, especially Dad. Dad was on his own as him and Mum had recently separated, and Mum and my siblings had moved off to town. All the old man ever did was work. Him and Grandad were real pioneers in the ag chem industry. They took great pride in their machinery. But after Grandad died, I noticed some things like the yard becoming less and less tidy. Things were starting to slip. A bit later that year, one of our family friends called in, and here was the old man sitting in the dark beside the fire trying to keep warm. His power had been cut off, his phone disconnected. With Grandad and Mum not there to do the footwork, he had clearly fell behind, and we had no idea things were that bad. He just didn't reach out, didn't ask for help. At about the same time, I was actually down a driver and needed someone urgently. The old man had nowhere else to go, so it seemed like a great opportunity to ask him, but I was nervous. I was having to ask him to come and work underneath me. This was one of my teachers, but he accepted the job and moved up to Leaston. After a season of us working together and really, grappling with the concept and getting beyond that initial uncomfortable phase, Dad really stepped up and got to a point where I knew he could step into management. And while my family were growing up without me, I realised I was just working too much. Even when I was home, I just wasn't present. I was always thinking about the weather, the workload, the work to do. And so I started to look for another job. I applied for a job as a local fertiliser truck dispatch operator. And I was offered the job. But before I could accept that job, I was approached one day by one of my clients, Tim Chamberlain. And we had a really profound discussion. He told me a bit about his farming operations. And then he asked me a really crazy question. He asked me if I'd like to manage his farm. And although that may not sound that crazy to you guys right now, when I tell you that at this time, Harts Creek Farm had been certified organic for over 30 years, you then get why it's a bit crazy. I was a local chemical expert. I knew nothing about organics. I come from a long line of chemical applicators. And other than, flax jandals, long beards, long hair, ponytails, and suspicious smelling cigarettes, I really had no idea what this whole organics thing was about. But, something within me wanted to look into this. And Tim was nothing like that. Tim was a businessman. He operated with authenticity and spoke from the heart. So I started to consider this crazy job. It was a substantial drop in pay, and for any young, growing family, that would normally be a deal breaker. But I really wanted a taste of this. There was something about it, so I accepted the job. And that first year at Harts Creek Farm, I learnt more than my entire career combined. I went from being the expert to being a complete beginner. I remember early on in the piece, I was asked to go and plant a beautiful barley crop that I was really proud of, planted out with an understory of about 15 different plant species. And I just thought, what on earth? Why on earth would I want to do that? It's a beautiful crop of barley. These plants are surely going to take all the nutrients away and would be left with nothing. But I went out anyway. I wasn't going to rest at that though. I purposely left an area undrilled so that I could prove to these guys that this was just a crazy concept. We clearly need to leave these plants on their own to grow, otherwise they won't succeed. Come harvest, I was looking forward to proving that point, and boy was I in for a surprise. What I discovered was that the area that I'd planted this crazy mix of plants underneath grew with a lot more vigour, less disease, and yielded exceptionally well. And the area that I was sure was going to grow more was full of rust and looked substantially less in yield. I was not expecting that. Not only that, but after harvest, we're able to harvest high, leave the stubble standing, and come in with lambs on 3 to 4 tons of gorgeous pasture straight in behind the harvester. With a balanced carbon to nitrogen ratio, after trampling all that material into the ground, we're able to turn what was once considered to me a low-value byproduct, straw, that I once had to take away and sell for bugger all or simply burn to get out of the way. We turned that into a highly valuable microbial feeder and soil builder. Not only that, but with that balanced carbon to nitrogen ratio, we're able to rapidly break down that stubble to the point where 4 weeks later, it was not to be seen. I became absolutely fascinated with the soil. I developed a hunger, a vacuum for knowledge. I got the opportunity soon after to attend a workshop by Nicole Masters. Nicole really opened up my world to the life beneath our feet. I left this 2-day workshop just moved by what I discovered, to the point where I just wanted to hang out with all the people that were in that room. And I started to do so. Later on, I realised that what was missing in our area was a bit of a discussion group, a place where we could come together and talk about and share these not-so-common practices. So I spoke to Simon Osborne and Nigel Greenwood, and together we created a discussion group. In the middle of July 2018, we all met up at Harts Creek Farm, about 30 of us. We decided what we'd like the group to be about and the direction we would like to head in. The coming months were followed by regular field days where more and more people would turn up, to the point where we thought, we needed to name this thing. So Simon, Nigel and I sat down in my office at Harts Creek Farm, and we came up with the name, Quorum Sense, which is a bit of a play on words. Quorum referring to the phenomenon called quorum sensing, whereby levels of diversity in communities such as soil microbial communities are reached such that outcomes are produced that you would never see produced by any one individual of that community. And core and sense referring to common sense, because for us, it was just that, common sense. After a few years, the group grew and grew. We held a workshop, a bit of an event at the Lakeside Hall. We had 5 farmers speaking. Over 135 people turned up. The hall was at capacity. We had to turn people away. There was a need out there that we had tapped into. It grew and grew to the point where we had to elect a board of trustees and a manager. And today, Quorum Sense has over 3,500 members and 5 staff members. After learning so much with Quorum Sense, I really discovered that I wanted to create a world that works aligned with nature. How can I take what it was that for me was missing during my farming career and provide it to those farmers without going through the uncomfortable stages that I had to go to? I've created Natural Performance Limited, a consultancy company committed to just that, providing to the farmers of the world the practices, fundamental knowledge and perspective required such that they can take on their own journey, their own way to increase their farm's resilience. We were playing with multi-species pastures and discovering that the more plants we would plant in any one area, the more profound the outcomes. And that was just against everything I'd been taught in the past. Anything above 15 species seemed to just grow like mad. I realised there was a missing in the market for these high diversity seed mixes. So I teamed up with Peter Barrett from Lindburn Station and created Symbiosis Ag Limited, a company that creates custom high diversity seed mixes to increase soil health, animal health and plant health. We'd been playing around with planting 25 to 50 plant species annual setup crops to replace monocultures of fodder beet and kale. And the results were staggering. Without fertiliser, we could match and sometimes grow more than the traditional monocultures, and with no applied fertiliser. Not only that, but we could be left with, rather than bare and compacted soil, regrowth. These crops would regrow. I had clients that were growing monocultures of fodder beet that would cost them over $2,500 per hectare, only to leave them in soil and animal health degradation. Now, we can grow diverse species seed crops and grow just as much, if not more, plants that regrow with no fertiliser for a cost of around $500 per hectare. Not only that, but animal health was increased. By providing a balanced carbon to nitrogen ratio, our animals were able to consume less dry matter and produce more outcomes. By consuming plants that are grown using these natural cycles, they're able to obtain all of the complex proteins, minerals, nutrients, secondary metabolites, and the enzymes and microbes required for breakdown of that biomass. Through this process, we would also see animals diversifying their gut biome, which increased their resilience, their fertility, their reproduction fertility. We were seeing transformations where before we would only have 1 or 2 worms per spade to having well over 50 worms per spade. It would take longer than 30 minutes to infiltrate an inch of water, and after growing these crops, we would be able to infiltrate an inch of water in less than 30 seconds. What we're facing right now is actually a broken hydrological system. We go from drought to flood and drought to flood, one extreme to the next. Monocultures, excessive use of fertiliser, bare soil, and poor grazing management contribute to this. All this might sound a bit crazy, and to me, 10 years ago, this would have been absolute bonkers. I would have ridiculed someone telling me this stuff, and I would have had all of the science and information to validate my claims. See, science is a fantastic tool, and I'm excited to see it to be used to empower and allow for farmers to be validated in their discoveries on the ground. These paddocks all of a sudden would burst into life. The soil would begin to breathe, and thus the fungi would thrive, sharing and mobilizing nutrients between plants from depths that we can't even test for, and in forms that we can't even comprehend. With growing high diversity seed mixes and using effective grazing management, we can increase our soil organic matter upwards of 1% per year. That 1% increase in soil organic matter means that for every hectare of soil, we can increase our water holding capacity upwards of 150,000 litres. The science we use today is a very powerful tool, and a lot of the information we have on nutrient provision, nutrient removal rates and crop requirements are often obtained using methodologies that are studied under controlled environments where we study monocultures and the soil does not contain the microbes that we would normally see in biologically active soils. Therefore, we don't get the services that those microbes would normally provide. We test for these nutrients using soil tests taken with samples only from the top 75 to 150 millimetres of soil. We know when we have nature working in our side that we can access more than that. The really cool thing about this is the more I dig, the more I learn, the more that I discover, we've only just begun to scratch the surface of this massively complex, interconnected world. So you might be wondering about what happened to my chemical applicating dad when I left Leaston. I better not leave that part out. He's doing really well. He actually went into partnership and bought the business. And I know, although he won't say it to me, that he's really proud of me. I've had calls recently from clients of his telling me that the old man won't stop banging on about how impressed he is with what I do. See, I love what I do. For me, it is a great privilege. There is a lot of work to do. I believe we can only do that work together. Here before us lies the greatest opportunity yet, the opportunity to create a world that works aligned with nature. When our children can swim and drink from the rivers of this beautiful place that we call home, when we only have healthy food on our tables, when you and I can look at each other and ourselves in acceptance, awe and wonder, then we can look back and say, you know what? It looks like we did it. Nō reira, ngā mihi nui, ngā mihi aroha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.